The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I want to welcome you all to this presentation on considering the GSA schedule, what you need to know. My name is Alba. I'll be doing the second part of this. I'm a partner at the law firm PilieroMazza, and I work pretty much exclusively in the government contracting space, focusing on small business issues and GSA issues. And with me is...
Hi, I'm Courtney Fairchild, President and CEO of Global Services. We focus on helping contractors obtain and maintain GSA schedules. We've done about over 1,700 in the last 17 years, so hopefully we'll be able to give you all the information you need to know on GSA schedules today and answer all of your questions.
All right, and we shall get started.
All right, so our first slide is both sides of my information. I'm going to get started with today on more of the overview. You can see on the slide that we have up, and by the way, I should back up for a second and mention that these slides are available for anyone that wants to download them. We've given you the link at the bottom of this slide, PilieroMazza.com/presentations. So you'll be able to access the slides at that website for those of you that were asking before we started. Here's our contact information as well. Should you need anything from either one of us after the presentation, we're going to try to allow for some questions at the end. But if there's something that we didn't get to, feel free to contact us. We're going to go through today a brief overview of the schedule, talk about what the schedule is, why you might want it, and then also talk about some of the reasons that you might not want it, what the disadvantages or rather the important qualifications to get a GSA schedule are. And then I'm going to turn it over to Sai, who's going to talk about some of the new laws that have come into place as they apply to the GSA schedule program, and we'll let him give his expertise on that. So we'll start off with what is a GSA schedule. It's a silly question, but many people, when they ask, really what's the definition of a GSA schedule, the answer to that is that the GSA schedule catalog is a listing of all contractors that have been awarded under a specific statement of work. So when you're thinking of the IT Schedule 70, for instance, for those of you that are familiar, the GSA schedule technically is a listing of every contractor that has been awarded under that contract vehicle. When used in everyday language, people talk about having their GSA schedule or their GSA schedule contract. Your price list, as it's been awarded under whatever particular GSA schedule, can also be referred to as your GSA schedule or your GSA schedule contract. The GSA schedule program was put into place to mirror commercial buying practices. The idea behind GSA schedules is not a cost-based contract. They are past performance-based contracts, and I'm going to get into later what that means in terms of being able to prime the contract vehicle. But GSA wanted to get into the business of relying on what your commercial practices are and how you are pricing from an industry perspective, as opposed to what it costs you to provide that service or to produce that product. The GSA schedule program was also put into place as sort of a generic buying tool for the entire federal government. There's over 10 million commercial items and services, over 15,000 companies that hold GSA schedules. So if you think about sort of like a Staples catalog, a huge catalog of pre-approved vendors, it's one of the easiest ways for government to be able to purchase from contractors. There are over 40 plus GSA schedules. They all have different statements of work, whether that be information technology, security, products, you name it. The government buys it with the one exclusion of architectural and engineering. You can pretty much get it on a GSA program, but each of the solicitations, although they are distinct from one another and handled by different regions, have a cohesive set of terms and conditions that are similar. So let's talk about what the terms and conditions of the GSA schedule are. All of the GSA schedules are essentially GWACs, government-wide acquisition contracts, that have either domestic or worldwide scope. That's up to you when you're applying for the contract. So this allows you to sell to any governmental agency, federal executive level agency within reason of who has purchase authority. And it allows you to be able to sell for over 5 years with 3 5-year renewals, meaning it's a potential 20-year contract vehicle. It's called evergreen contracting. Each original GSA schedule has a 5-year period of performance and then 3 5-year follow-on options. They're all open season solicitations. For those of you that are familiar with federal contracting, most RFPs or requests for proposals have a specific due date. The GSA schedule is a little bit more interesting insofar as it's sort of like college rolling admissions. There's no due date by which you have to have your proposal submitted. That tends to be a really good thing for a lot of companies. It can also be a really bad thing for companies because there's no due date, and so it's the thing that tends to sit on your desk. A lot of executives are downloading that RFP and it's sitting on their desk for a while. So in order to do this, and we'll talk about it later, you need to be sure that you set aside the resources to be able to do it. None of the GSA schedules have a maximum order limitation. There is literally no cap to the amount of money that you can put through a GSA schedule. It's a little bit of a misnomer because each of the schedules has something called a maximum order limitation clause within the contract, but that is simply the level above which ordering agencies should request a volume discount from you. GSA says, hey, these are the rates that we, for services or the price for the product that we have negotiated between $0 and $500,000, for instance. And it's to trigger the ordering agency for purchases over that amount. They should seek additional discounts. All of the GSA schedules release the Fed Biz Ops posting requirements from the FAR. So if you're making a GSA schedule purchase, you're likely not going to see that on FBO, Fed Biz Ops. It may go out through the electronic ordering system through GSA, which is called the eBuy system or GSA Advantage, but you will probably not see that on Fed Biz Ops. All of the GSA schedules for a basic purchase require that you get 3 requests for quotations, 3 RFQs, and also allow, and this is important, for a best value award. There are not a lot of contracts that don't require best price, which is not to say that ordering agencies aren't ultimately chasing the best price, obviously. Having said that, you could have a certification or have done the initial work that makes you a good follow-on option or have a specific personnel that allows you to be the best value and not necessarily the best price. On all of the schedules, your pricing is already determined fair and reasonable by GSA. The entire process and point of pursuing a GSA schedule contract is to hammer out with GSA and negotiate your ceiling prices. You're allowed to spot discount to ordering agencies without having to drop your price again, but it will tie your hands commercially, and we're going to talk about that just in a little bit in terms of what you're able to do on the commercial side. From a GSA schedule side, you're allowed to give any number of discounts that you want without having to give it to the next client as well. Each of the GSA schedules have a 0.75% industrial funding fee. The IFF is a fancy term for the amount of money that GSA collects for this contract vehicle. You might hear ordering agencies say that the GSA schedule is an expensive contract to purchase from. It really couldn't be further from the truth. 0.75% is the cost of using that vehicle, and while it is added back in, most GWACs or IDIQs have hidden costs that are much closer to 5 or 6%. GSA is very transparent in putting this out there and letting everybody know what the true cost of the contract is. And lastly, all of the schedules require that you do quarterly reporting. and that allows GSA to stay out of the ordering business. So once you you're negotiating with GSA, and once you've been awarded a contract vehicle, it allows you to go out and sell directly to the ordering agency. GSA does not get involved in your statement of work with the ordering agency, and they don't get involved with the membrane of money. So it allows for a good direct relationship between you and your customer, unlike some of the other contract vehicles out there. So this slide lists the sales from 2010 to 2013. This will show you the bottom number, which varies anywhere from $34 billion to $39 billion, is the total for all of the GSA schedule sales. I've listed just the top sellers. These are not all of the GSA schedules that are available, but the top sellers. You'll quickly note that the IT schedule accounts for a little less than half of the entire program. So there's 40 schedules, and the IT schedule's about 45% of that revenue. The MOBIS contract, or management consulting contract, is close in second. Professional engineering. And what you'll notice as you go down this line is that some of the professional services schedules have started to account for more and more of the revenue as well. GSA, up until about 17 years ago, ran this program solely on products. Once they added services to the IT schedule, they have subsequently released over 15 professional services schedules, and they've really taken off, as there's no other sort of GWAC vehicle or vehicle that you can sell to the entire government that's specific to services. One of the questions that people often want to know is why. What's so attractive about a GSA schedule? So the advantages for government are a little bit different than the advantages for industry. Having said that, each of you really is interested in making it as easy as possible for the government to purchase. So the advantages for government are really advantages for you as well. Each of the schedules allows for millions state-of-the-art commercial products and services. So the government, and this is a concept that some people have a hard time grasping, you might have the need, the budget, and the authority to purchase something. And you might have found a company that you want to purchase it from, but they're not quote-unquote authorized. You can't just make that purchase. So there's got to be a contract vehicle, or you've got to put it out full and open purchase in some way. The GSA schedules are a quick and easy way for ordering agencies to find millions of products and services and thousands of companies that are already pre-approved and that they can purchase from. The GSA schedule ordering process allows any government employee with purchase authority to make a purchase. That means someone with a credit card, or any even program management staff sometimes have purchase authority that can actually make a GSA schedule purchase. That isn't to say that the ordering agencies don't have their own processes, and everyone has a distinct, each agency has sort of a distinct process that you'll have to follow through. So you'll have to find out how it is that your agency likes to purchase. There are some built-in time and money saving tools that are really specific and make the GSA schedule attractive. One is teaming arrangements. You can have multiple GSA schedule holders get involved in what's called a contractor teaming arrangement. So it allows small businesses to come together, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but it allows small businesses to form a team to be able to compete where maybe only large businesses would previously be able to. Blanket purchase agreements are very attractive for ordering agencies in terms of setting aside a repetitive need. And as I said before, your pricing is already determined fair and reasonable by GSA. So for those agencies that don't have added terms and conditions of their own purchase policy, and you may have heard a little bit about the DoD stepping back recently and talking about whether or not they're going to have to re-justify that as price reasonable. But assuming that the ordering agency is going to accept the price reasonableness, which they have up until now, it makes for a much faster purchase. The advantages for industry are pretty similar as those for the government. the government considers GSA schedules a priority source of supply under FAR Part 8. These are not mandatory use schedules, but they are one of the places that you're supposed to look as a priority source of supply. I talked a little bit before about the direct customer relationship that it allows without mippering of money and getting involved between you and your customer. It allows you to better manage the customer relationship, as well as customizing a services solution and allowing for a best value determination as opposed to a best price determination. Each of the schedules have limited competition. We talked a little bit ago about getting 3 RFQs and making a best value award. That's really different from posting something on FedBizOps and having the whole world be able to apply to that. So if you are proactively doing your business development and have located an opportunity that is going to be a very likely win for you, it's a great way to close business. I don't think I've said it yet today. I'm famous for saying it all the time. Your phone's not going to ring for getting on a GSA schedule. So if you're doing this because you think that you're going to stand out in one of the 10,000 IT contractors, that is likely not going to happen. However, if you have a proactive business development process and an accurate pipeline and are building customer relationships, it's a fantastic way to close business, to quickly shut out your competition and close the business. The one thing that's interesting about the GSA Schedule program as well is that it allows for small and large business participation. With the exception of the subcontractor requirements for large business, which there are, it allows for sort of an equal playing field in the same terms and conditions for a small business and a large business that are specific to each company's own business practices. These schedules are set and negotiated against your own business practices, not against industry standards. And lastly, the big advantage in my estimation for having a GSA schedule is speed. Gartner Group did a study that essentially said a GSA schedule purchase takes on average about 13 to 15 days. So that's about 2 weeks, right? And a full and open competition takes about 9 months, 268 days. So from an ordering agency perspective, if they can run something, imagine the amount of work that is decreased in 9 months to 2 weeks. So if you can make it that much faster and able to close the business, I think that's one of the primary reasons people are successful when they use their GSA schedules, when they are. So BPAs and teaming, let's talk about that for a second. The blanket purchase agreements allow for repetitive purchase, whether it's product or services. A BPA can be up to 5 years, but it has to be set aside a contract vehicle. You can't have a BPA that has no backbone. So the GSA schedules allow for the basis of award and allow for the blanket purchase agreement to be for typically a year with 1-year options. BPAs have taken off hugely recently in over hundreds of millions of dollars and issued with GSA schedule connections. The teaming arrangements that I discussed before, so there's 2 ways that you can team when you're using a GSA schedule contract. The first is what most of you will think of when you think of subcontractor relationships. You have a prime and you have a subcontractor. The subcontractor, in this case, must fit under the prime's GSA schedule. So in order to offer the solution, the prime has to have each of the labor categories, each of the products, whatever it is that they want to be able to list on their GSA schedule themselves. That works when a larger company has multiple schedules or the scope of work is something that's covered. You're then allowed to just do a typical subcontract. Specific to the GSA schedule program, you can also have what I just talked about, contractor teaming arrangements, where multiple GSA schedule holders come together to offer a total solution. In this scenario, each small business is going to be responsible for reporting their own sales, whichever part of that contract they held, and paying their own industrial funding fee. There is a lead that will take what you would think of as the prime responsibilities in terms of billing, but there is no prime in this scenario. And the ordering agency then gets credit for each, if you have different certifications, whatever percentage of that buy goes out to that particular type of certified company. The benefit here obviously being that small businesses that don't have everything that they might need on their one GSA schedule contract or two contracts to be able to bid an entire solution, this allows them to find teaming partners, come together, and to provide a total solution for bid. So those are sort of the schedule overview and the reasons that it is so attractive to very many contractors. I want to talk a little bit now about the requirements and the limitations, the things that you want to think about when you're considering, should I get a GSA schedule and can I get a GSA schedule? These are the things I think you should focus on. The first of which applies to, can I prime a GSA schedule contract? What are the past performance requirements? As I said, this is a past performance-based contract. So a company that incorporated yesterday or even 4 months ago is not eligible to prime a GSA schedule contract. In order to go after this, you have to, at a minimum, have been in business for 2 years. The requirement for each of the GSA schedules is now that you have been running revenue, and you can show financials for the last 2 years. So not just incorporated, but actively doing business. From a services standpoint, even further than that, for each of the GSA schedules, there's a set of categories called special item numbers. Each special item number has its specific statement of work. So on the IT schedule, for instance, one of the special item numbers is IT services. If you want to pursue the IT services SIN, you have to have a minimum of 2 projects that you have completed as this company that were either completed within the last 2 years, or if it's a multi-year project, the first year must have been completed. So within the last 2 years, you have to have done what you want to put on schedule. It's not about who you have on staff and what you are able to do. It's all about what you have done within the last 2 years. And that's going to be what you're able to qualify for. Those tasks must be within the scope of whatever the special item number that you're going after. If it's management consulting, it's got to be in that scope. If it happens to be an advertising and marketing task, it's got to be within that scope. And should be within similar complexity to that statement of work as well. That's from a technical standpoint. From a pricing standpoint, equally as important, you must have billed for every service or product you want to put on schedule previously, and preferably within the last 2 years. GSA will ask you to create a pricing proposal that is inclusive of invoices to support that documentation. So again, not what you want to do, what you have done previously. And your entire price proposal is going to center around what your past pricing practices have been. Each of the schedules have some specific requirements for each SIN, so make sure when you're reading whichever schedule that you want to, that you have time to look through and make sure which SINs are important. All of the schedules, and I mention this because it's going to make a change to your accounting system, so you should be aware of this as well. You've got to report and pay your industrial funding fee on a quarterly basis within 30 days of the calendar quarter end. You have to be able to show GSA, what they call industrial operations analyst, who's the auditor, that you can run a report specific to each SIN that you hold on your contract. So there will be some slight auditing of your accounting system just to ensure that you're able to pull these task orders out of the system so that you're properly capturing what you owe GSA. And they're pretty serious about you not missing any of their dollars. The Trade Agreement Act is applicable to each of the GSA schedules. FAR 52.225-5 sets out a list of designated countries. So your services have to be provided or your products must be manufactured in a Trade Agreement Act designated country or the U.S. Again, if you go to that FAR clause, you'll see that the list. So if your products are made in China, for instance, you cannot place them on a GSA schedule. If your services are outsourced to India, for instance, you cannot place them on a GSA schedule. The performance must be done in a Trade Agreement Act country. From a product perspective, items that come from non-designated countries like China must undergo what's called a substantial transformation into a new and different article of commerce. You will talk to my buddy Sai here about some of those things, but what really constitutes substantial transformation may be more, it's more than just taking it out of the box and connecting it to another piece in the U.S. So keep those things in mind. For those companies that are focused and do their manufacturing in other countries, then move on, because the GSA schedule is not going to be the right place for your products. From a price adjustment standpoint, you're allowed to go in and adjust your pricing both for products and for services on an annual basis. You must, however, for both products and both services, hold your prices for 12 months from the date of award. This is important for companies that are in volatile manufacturing markets where the price of gas or something could substantially change the cost of what it is to produce a product, because you won't be able to change, for the very first year, you won't be able to change the price. After the first year, you can go in up to 3 times per 12 months and request an increase that is somewhere between 4 and 10%, depending on which type of GSA schedule we're talking about. Your price adjustments are going to be set when you get awarded. You will set forth in your final proposal revision letter, but there's only 3 ways to base your increases. One will be if you have a commercial price list and that has increased, then you will increase your GSA price accordingly. You will have to show substantiation of that increase. It's not just submitting a new commercial price list, but invoices that verify your prices have indeed gone up. The second is a market price indicator that you negotiate prior to award. So the Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor and Statistics has a table that GSA likes to use, and they may say, okay, for professional and management services, this is the indicator that we're going to use, and then every 12 months, the anniversary 12 months of your contract, you will look at whatever that indicator is at, and you will raise your prices accordingly. For people that are price or risk averse, this tends to be a good option because it's very low right now. It's like 1.7 or 1.8 depending on what you're looking at. And if you have the idea that this is going to go up to 3 in the future, and it has been up to 4 at certain points in time, it allows you to have a less risk-averse solution. The last way to do a price adjustment is to just set a pre-negotiated escalation factor to say, for instance, we're going to accept a 2% increase over the 5 years. My note at the bottom, GSA is always happy to entertain your price lowering at any point in time. So I'm going to finish up before I send it over to Sai with what might be the most important for those of you that are holders already and for those of you that are considering getting on schedule, and that is to talk for a second about the price reduction clause. You'll see the GSR clause number here on the screen, but each of the GSA schedules have the price reduction clause associated with it. And the price reduction clause says this, essentially. You, at the time of award, pick and agree upon what the basis of award category of customer is, meaning who's your most favored customer, who's your best customer, and GSA says, okay, you give commercial customers a 5% discount from your standard pricing, and you're giving GSA a 10% discount from your standard pricing. That's all documented, and what you have to do over time, if that's the case, is to ensure that you maintain that discount relationship. You may never give a commercial customer, and from this standpoint, another important point, prime contractors are considered commercial for GSA. Prime contractors are commercial, so it's the it is the entity that you're invoicing that will make up the determination of the class of customer. But you, then, if you've agreed that 5% is the best discount that you give, then you can never give a commercial customer more than a 5% discount without triggering this price reduction clause. If you trigger the clause, you have 15 days to say to GSA, okay, we've given a 7% discount and we're going to lower our GSA schedule pricing accordingly for whatever that product or service was, an additional 2% as well. It's all fine as long as you go in and lower your GSA pricing. But the integrity of the discount relationship must be maintained over time. Having said that, those companies that really need leeway in terms of pricing, whether it's for products or whether it's for services, this is going to hamper and tie your hands just a little bit in terms of what you're able to do commercially in the future. So if you don't want a government contract that's going to tie your hands a bit in terms of pricing, then the GSA schedule is probably not right, or you need to think about spinning off a government arm or a separate company that you can isolate your price, or you can isolate your commercial practices. This has been a part of the contract since its inception. There's always talk about getting rid of it. However, up until now, that hasn't happened. So those are some of the reasons that you might pause before you decide that you want to jump on a schedule. It's not always the right answer. GSA schedules are used 1 out of 3 instances of purchase, but dollar-wise, it's much lower percentage in terms of the total government spend. It is, however, one of the most generically available contract vehicles out there. It's hard to find another contract vehicle that casts as wide of a net as the schedule does. So having said all of that, I am going to now hand it over to Cy and let him talk to you about some of the newer government regulations that have been put in place that affect purchasing and how you maintain your contract over time. Cy?
Thank you. I had a few. All right, this is just, first thing I want to do is go through an overview of the new multiple award contract rule that came out last summer. It's been almost a year now, and I know with GSA, they're still sort of getting the hang of things, and I don't know, I've kind of butted heads with a couple GSA folks in the past month or so with regard to some of these things, so I just want to make sure everyone's aware of them. And it'll also, if you're looking to get on the schedule, it's something to know about beforehand so that you better understand what you're getting into. Generally speaking, just like the old rule for every other type of contract, you're small at the initial stage when you submit your offer with price, initial offer, you're small for the life of the contract. And that, the general rule means that you are small for the life of the entire GSA schedule until your option year comes up. Then you have to recertify, and once you recertify, if you can, as a small business, you're good for that next 5-year period. And so every order that comes out under the schedule, you refer back to your size status at the time of the initial award of the contract, not each task order. So you can essentially, you can be awarded a GSA schedule on December 31st, and if on January 1st you're a large business looking back at your 3-year average, so long as you get that bid in and you get your proposal in, you certify on the December 31st date, you are a small business for the life of that schedule, regardless of any orders that come out after that. Now, the exception to that is if contracting officers explicitly request recertification, and that's a very confusing issue because what does expressly requesting means? Well, that's something that has been batted around back and forth We've had a number of cases about it, and so have other companies, other law firms, and it doesn't seem like there's really a good answer on that. So on a case-by-case basis, when you're looking at your orders, you use your discretion and best judgment. If it seems like the agency is looking for a recertification request with regard to a task order, it's probably in your best interest to ask the question to see if they're explicitly doing it. Are they requesting it, or is it a typo or just poor language? Another thing to note with regard to ordering agreements or BPAs, under the new rules, they're clarifying that a BPA is not a contract, and so although you have to certify to your size when you're awarded the BPA, you have to also certify for every single task order that you get under a BPA. Now, the good thing about GSA schedules, what we're talking about here, is that rule does not apply to GSA schedules or arguably to VA schedules. It only applies to non-scheduled multiple award contracts. So, and I've seen some confusion about that, but it's important to note that if you have a GSA schedule, then you have certified at the time that you got the award of the underlying contract. So therefore, you don't have to recertify on task orders or at the BPA level, because it goes back to the underlying contract. Under the new rule, there's a few things that they wanted to clarify. Earlier, before last summer, the only thing you could do on a GSA schedule is you could reserve task orders or reserve a scheduled contract for small business participation. Now, neither SBA rules nor the FAR had any concept of what that meant. What does it mean to reserve something for small businesses? Well, it meant nothing. FAR Part 19 didn't apply. Most of FAR Part 13, not FAR Part 13, this 13 CFR didn't apply. It was very much sort of a wild, wild west. And so SBA took it upon themselves to start to look at this world of schedules and generally multiple award contracts and figure out what would work best. So what they said is, all right, we're going to create a three-tier structure. We're going to have real set-asides that are small business set-aside contracts like any other. FAR Part 19, 13 CFR, it all applies. They're real set-asides. We're going to have partial set-asides, which we had in the past, but they changed the rules a little bit to make it easier to work with these multiple award schedules and multiple award contracts. And then lastly, we're going to keep this reserve nomenclature, but we're going to clarify what exactly it means. So with regard to real set-asides, the rule of two still applies to them. So if you have, whether it's any sort of general multiple award contract, if two or more small businesses can compete and provide reasonable pricing for that underlying contract, it has to be set aside. In the GSA schedule world, it's different because essentially the rule of two would dictate that any GSA schedule, they would all be set aside. There would be no such thing as non-set aside GSA schedules, because if two or more small businesses could perform the schedule, then they would never be able to solicit these things from large businesses. So that issue has not completely been clarified yet. So the basic workaround that everybody's doing now, or the assumption, is that the rule of two doesn't necessarily apply to GSA schedules or arguably VA schedules. What they can do is any number of things within the rest of these tools here. So they could say, all right, we're going to set aside a task order for small business participation, and arguably the general small business rules should apply to the solicitation for that task order. If two or more small businesses can't perform the work, then they're supposed to go into this other mode where they're using either partial set-asides or reserve, but they're not required to do so. So I know, some of you guys might be familiar with the Delex case that we did a few years back, and it seems like SBA has kind of backpedaled from that a little bit, and instead of saying, well, the rule of two absolutely applies to orders under a GSA schedule, they said, well, no, it doesn't really, because in the GSA schedule context, they don't think it makes sense. But that does still allow buyers from the schedule to set aside specific task orders, and then all the rules apply. They can do partial set-asides if they can split it up into specific SINs or CLINs under a larger buy, for instance, like a BPA. So if you have a larger BPA, you could say, well, for SIN 31 and 32, we're going to have those SINs under, say, the MOBA schedule. We're going to set those aside for small business participation, whereas the other SINs were not. If they want to do something like that, there are rules to dictate how the agency is supposed to do that. And once that's done, non-small businesses should not be able to win work under those SINs for whatever structure of this contract is. If it's a BPA, like we just said, then under that BPA, only small businesses will be eligible for that sort of work. If it's something where, it's kind of a vague BPA, they're not sure exactly what they need, or the market research is unclear as to whether or not small businesses can perform certain discrete portions of the work, then what they can do is they'll say, all right, as task orders come up, we're going to look, we're going to check, and if small businesses are available, then we're going to reserve certain task orders at our discretion for small business participation, in which case we would argue that a lot of the rules and regulations from FAR Part 19 and 13 CFR would attach at that point, and it would be treated just like any other small business procurement. This change right here for this slide for partial set-asides is important because in the past, small businesses had to bid on the full and open work in order to have a chance to bid on the set-aside work, and that is no longer the case. So that's good news because it's a waste of resources for a lot of times at least, for small businesses to bid on work that, Lockheed and other very large companies are going after, because in those cases their likelihood of winning is pretty low. Recognizing that fact, SBA changed the rules to allow contractors to bid only on the portions of the work that are set aside. And I think that actually flows out of the Delex case because this problem and issue was recognized by GAO there and by the Court of Federal Claims afterwards. Here with total set-asides, this is what I talked about a little earlier, where if the rule of two can attach for multiple award contracts at the contract level, it has to be set aside. But again, for GSA schedules, or arguably for VA schedules as well, then this doesn't exactly apply because it just would be untenable, because then you'd have a situation where there would be no large business that could ever compete. Again, whenever you're choosing this next part about 8As or hub zone, whenever you're choosing to set aside a contract or to use the reserve or partial set aside, the contracting officer has complete discretion to put it under any program that they wish. Here, with partial set-asides and reserves, this slide is kind of what I already talked about, but it may give a little bit more detail, and I just wanted everyone to have access to it in case they want to go back and see it. And by the way, I know at the beginning people were commenting that they couldn't see the link. It should be in the chat window, and we'll put it up again later. All right, and so size status under multiple award contracts. This includes GSA schedules. And so, again, when you get your initial schedule, when you submit the proposal with price for the initial schedule, that's when your certification is made. That's when your size status is locked in. So if you grow to become other than small in the first month, first day of your contract, you're still eligible to bid as a small business on that work. Now, what's somewhat interesting with regard to size status is what about consolidated schedules? And I don't know how many of you guys have consolidated schedules, but the issues come up, and I don't think it's been completely resolved even with these new regulations. And for those of you who don't know, a consolidated GSA schedule is one where a specific contractor might have had a MOBIS and then, say, environmental remediation and a log world schedule, and they all have them separately. Well, they can consolidate those schedules into a single contract, a single schedule that would have all of those components to it. Now, under under the rules that were in place, it said that any task order that issued under any contract, which would include a GSA schedule, has to have the NAICS code applied to it that applies to the underlying contract. So the way you apply NAICS codes to an underlying contract is whatever portion makes up the largest, or whatever NAICS code makes the largest proportion of the work under the contract, that's the NAICS code that applies to the contract. And by extension, that's the NAICS code that would apply to all task orders under that contract. So you'd have a situation under the consolidated schedule where a schedule holder could say they could be making $100 million a year because their log world, MOBIS, and environmental remediation schedules all were collapsed into a single schedule. If most of their work was under environmental remediation, that has a 500 employee size standard. So regardless of how much money they're making, they can still be small under that whole consolidated schedule based upon that one employee-based size standard. So then for task orders, they came out under MOBIS, they could bid on them, theoretically, as a small business, which MOBIS is a $14 million size standard. So if you could essentially bid as a $100 million, $200 million contractor on $14 million work. Now, it hasn't been completely addressed, but what SBA said is they've allowed GSA and other agencies under multiple award contracts to put multiple NAICS codes onto the work. And so therefore, whenever they're doing that, they can have one NAICS code on there for a certain SIN or CLIN, and one NAICS code for another one, and one NAICS code for another one. And then when they issue the task orders, they're issued under whatever NAICS code is appropriate, instead of kind of forcing everyone to use a single code for all work under a contract. And that's something, yeah, that I have in here later in the presentation. But there you go. So that's basically what I'm saying here, and that's where it's important, because I think in most cases it's going to get around this problem of consolidated schedules, because what you're going to do is they're going to have on the schedules multiple NAICS codes, and then task orders will be issued under a specific NAICS code. But it's still possible in theory for the problem to arise if contracting officers aren't well aware of the new rules, or they're following the old rules, or I know there's been some confusion over at GSA about how some of these rules should be implemented. So it's just something to watch out for. And to the extent that a competitor might be using a consolidated schedule, that you might have a potential size protest issue or something that you could use to your benefit. All right. The next thing on here, which should pop up in a second, is on-ramps and off-ramps. Whether it's a multiple award contract or larger BPAs and things like that, I've seen it come up more and more often that agencies are using on-ramps and off-ramps as a means of controlling the small business participation on their contracts. And this is sort of an exception to the rule that you're small for the life of the contract, because while no one's going to off-ramp you off of a GSA schedule contract, it's possible for a BPA or some agreement underneath the schedule that they could put some sort of off-ramp provision in here. And for those of you who just generally go after multiple award contracts aside from schedules, it's also something to be aware of. Like, for instance, T4, the big VA procurement had an off-ramp, and so if you're acquired, for instance, by a large business, they can ramp you off the contract immediately. So that's something to think about if you guys are coming to the end of life for your companies, or you're looking to sell. This might lower the value of certain contracts that you have. So it's just something to really think about. Or at the same time, if you've dropped down back below a certain size threshold, so you now are a small business, The on-ramps might be a way for you to get on these contracts or BPAs under the schedule. Limitation on subcontracting. This is another area that is in flux right now. There have been, long-standing regs under SBA. They've been around forever. They've been tweaked somewhat recently, and then even more recently, in the 2013 National Defense Authorization Act, Congress put forward a change to the rules, which made it so that, just skip forward because this is the important part, that made it so that the limitation on subcontracting for service and supply contracts is no longer tied to the labor or the manufacturing costs. It's now tied to the total amount paid to the contractor. So in theory, if you have let's say $100 million contract, $51 million of it is services, $49 million is supplies, and therefore it is a service contract. It's still majority services. The small business would have to perform 51% of the cost of that, not just 51% of the services portion of it. So that means if you're subcontracting part of the services out, let's say you're doing 40% of the services and 11% is being contracted out in this example, then out of the 49% of the cost of the contract that's coming from materials, those materials would have to be performed, quote-unquote, performed by the small business, or at least a portion of that, to bring them back up from 40% to 51%. Now, what it means to perform materials, I guess you could look, what we've said is you could look towards the non-manufacturer rule to determine that, which basically says that's what you use if you're providing supplies to the government, but you're not the actual manufacturer. Then you need to be a small business with less than 500 employees. You need to be a regular dealer in the industry for those products. You have to take ownership or possession of the product, and you have to provide the end product of a small business. Now, the last part especially can be onerous, but that's sort of a side note. It's something to definitely take into account, because when these rules really start to get enforced, which hasn't happened yet as far as we know, it's going to be a conundrum that will have to be dealt with, probably through regulation, but those regulatory changes and the SBA rules on this are probably a couple years away at best. So for right now, kind of Congress stepped in here and decided to change things on all of us without anybody being ready for it, and that's kind of created this issue here. If you ask SBA, some people at SBA will tell you that the 2013 NDAA changes that we're talking about don't yet apply to contracts, because the contract clause that is in your contract is the FAR clause from Part 19, which refers to 13 CFR, which is the SBA's rules. And yes, I could see that argument. We've certainly made that argument for clients if it's in their best interest, and I could see it going either way, because the fact of the matter is that is true, that is a contract term. But on the other hand, the 2013 NDAA is a law change, and so any regulation that's inconsistent with the law is, at least in theory, invalid. So that would invalidate certain parts of FAR Part 19 and certain parts of 13 CFR. As far as I know, this has not been litigated, it has not come to a head yet, and I don't think agencies are even willing to push this point because there's so much confusion on the issue. The good news from the 2013 NDAA is that you can perform the percentage of work using yourself and other similarly situated business entities. So here, what does it mean to be similarly situated? Well, if it's a small business, just a vanilla small business set aside, then any other small business would count as similarly situated. So therefore, if you as a small business performing 25%, and you're the prime contractor, one of your subcontractors who's also a small business qualifying under that NAICS code could perform 26% of the contract, and then together you are performing 51% of the work. In fact, because the law is so broad, there's actually no limitation on this. So in theory, the prime contractor could be performing 0%, and a subcontractor could be performing 100%. And at least by the black letter of the law, that would still qualify. Now, whether or not SBA would not like that, I think you'd find yourself maybe in a size challenge, and you could still get hit with an ostensible subcontractor problem, which might create affiliation between you and your subcontractor in that case, which may not matter. If you're both small under the contract, and even combined you'd be small, well then who cares about ostensible subcontractors? So that's just something else to think about. But so if it's 2 8A companies or 3 or 5 or 10 or whatever, it doesn't matter. Whatever number of 8A companies, if it's an 8A set aside, hub zone, if it's a hub zone set aside, woman owned, if it's a woman owned set aside, or vanilla small business, if it's just a vanilla small business set aside, any number of companies can come together to meet the performance and work requirements. That's under the similarly situated rule found in the 2013 National Defense Authorization Act. What's interesting, though, is a lot of people want to take advantage of the similarly situated rule while simultaneously ignoring the changes in the law under the performance of work rules that we just talked about before. And that's where things, again, it's very up in the air. I would say to be safe, I would follow both rules, but if you're in a situation where it's more beneficial to follow the old performance of work rules, legally, I think there are arguments that are not weak. They're pretty strong arguments that you're safe. And at the same time, I think there's very strong arguments that the law trumps the old rules. So it's kind of an interesting spot to be in right now. I know we're kind of running.
I talked about CTAs.
Yeah, so it's just something I wonder, was there something with the rules? Not really. The issues with CTAs under small business rules, and these are just issues that we've been thinking about, is how do you split revenues? I mean, technically speaking, it's not a joint venture, right? So under if you look at FAR Part 6, that defines CTA, which is actually not the way GSA looks at it, but SBA's rules under 13 CFR, under FAR Part 19, when they talk about how companies can come together to compete for contracts, it's either a teaming agreement, which is prime sub, or it's a joint venture. And that's the way FAR Part 6 explains it. And so under SBA's rules, if you're a prime sub, the prime gets hit with 100% of the revenues for purposes of their size standard. If it's a joint venture, you split it commensurate with your ownership interest. So how do you do it for a CTA? There are no rules on it. We think that they should be coming soon. But again, that's probably a couple years off, I would say, maybe a year, but probably a few. And so right now, I think the most conservative avenue would say the team lead takes 100% of the revenue, but that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so I think there's strong arguments to say that you split it just like you would for a joint venture. So whoever's performing whatever portion of the work, you'd flow those revenues down to that entity for its size purposes. You don't necessarily dump it all on one entity. But again, there are no rules on that just yet. Let's see. Oh, all members, I can think Courtney alluded to, is all members have to be eligible, right? So if it's an 8A contract or it's small business, everybody in the CTA has to qualify. This is something, a lot of people don't use joint ventures for GSA schedules for this exact purpose, but I mean, in theory, it's possible, but it's not really practical. The JV would have to have a schedule. How do you get the 2 years of experience for your joint venture? It just it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
I've never seen it happen.
Yeah, and we've never seen it happen, right? Just recently, I tried to. The client was well aware of the issues. We tried to novate a schedule to a joint venture with very good arguments, I might add, but it doesn't seem like GSA can get over its issue with this specific 2-year rule. Part of me, I'd like to see that changed, but it doesn't seem like it's going to happen anytime soon. And that's sort of the stuff that I was talking about in novations is you got to be aware of these 2-year rules. So it's something, if it's a new company, you're probably not going to get it novated. Asset tests, that's the #1 problem. with all novations, especially GSA novations, you can't just send contracts from one person to another. There has to be assets. And they're going to really, in my experience recently, they're going to look really hard at what those assets are. And if it's just some, I don't know, chairs, a table, a few computers, that's not going to cut it. They really want to see significant assets transferring.
I want to show the link again. We're getting a lot of questions on the link. That was your last slide.
Yeah.
I realized that we didn't show the link appropriately of where the slides are, so I'm going to take you back and show you where the slides can be downloaded. So can everyone see the link? Type in if you can't, but the link is at the bottom of the page. You should be able to, thanks Lorna, you should be able to go and download the see where my head is, the presentation from there. We do have some questions. We're running on time. I think we'll answer a couple of them, but know that we will, your questions came in with your name, and we will personally email you the answers as well. I want to do a quick answer to a question about a 621I healthcare staffing. You are right that the general terms and conditions I was discussing are specific to the GSA schedule program. The VA running the Federal Supply Service schedules have slightly different terms and conditions. The 621I is only a 10-year contract. The IFF is 1%. Some of those schedules have even a 0.5%. So there's just a couple of tweaks that are different with the VA program that I wanted to be to note. One other thing, and then I'll let Cy answer some questions. There was a question that came in about the primes being recognized as commercial contractors. I realize it flies in the face of channel selling, and that you typically would give a prime contractor lower than what your rates would be. Unfortunately, GSA really does see if you are billing a prime contractor, that is considered commercial. So you cannot go lower than what you agreed to in your basis of award with GSA to a prime contractor. That's correct. Do you see questions you want to answer?
Yeah, here, I'll grab a couple while we still have some time. Someone asked about construction under the 2013 NDAA changes. Construction and specialty construction has not changed. Congress told SBA to create rules for that. So Congress stepped in and specifically changed service and supply rules, and they directed SBA to change the the construction rules. But those construction rules have not yet been created. So as of right now, the old rules still apply until the new regulations, which haven't even been proposed yet, go into effect. So that's going to be a few years in the future.
We had a couple of questions on GSA's contractor assistance visits, the CAV. Global Services does an in-house training downtown on compliance. If you're interested, our website's up and you can go take a look at it. But the contractor compliance, it's really important that once you get on the schedule, you understand that the things that you need to do and the systems you have to put in place to get through the contractor assistance visit. They are not difficult in any way. You just need to proactively make sure you put those things into play. When you download our slides, both Cy and my information is there, so if you have additional questions, you can always let us know. I want to be mindful of people's time today and thank everyone for logging on. If we didn't get a chance to answer your question, we do have it logged, and we will email you a response within the next day or so. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.